A 15-year-old girl begging for food for her hungry siblings. Then a millionaire stops in front of her and offers something. Emily Thompson walks slowly along the cracked sidewalks of New York City, her legs heavy with exhaustion, her stomach gnawed with hunger, a constant ache that had become almost familiar. Just a few steps away, her younger siblings, Jacob and Lily, leaned against a wall stained with graffiti, their small figures hunched together. Lily's arms clutched Jacob tightly, while he stared blankly at the passing crowd, his face pale from days without enough food. Emily knew it was on her to keep them alive. The weight of that knowledge pressed on her chest, suffocating but undeniable. She'd already lost count of how many people she'd asked for help that day, only to receive cold glares, quick dismissals, and silence in return. Every rejection chipped away at the small sliver of hope she clung to. "Excuse me, could you spare some food?" she asked a well-dressed man passing by, her voice barely louder than a whisper. The shame in her chest burned hotter than the hunger in her belly, but she forced herself to speak. She had to. The man didn't even stop. He shot her a brief, disdainful glance, as if she were invisible, or worse, something to be avoided. He kept walking, muttering under his breath, "Can't help every beggar on the street." Emily bit the inside of her cheek, holding back tears. She couldn't afford to cry. Not in front of Jacob and Lily. Not when they were counting on her. She turned away from the crowd, hands shoved deep in her pockets, fingers trembling slightly from hunger and frustration. Jacob's soft voice drifted toward her. "Emily, I'm really hungry." "I know, Jake," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I know." Lily tugged at Emily's sleeve. "When can we go home, Emmy?" Emily knelt in front of them, brushing a tangled lock of hair out of Lily's eyes. "Soon, baby," she lied softly, pressing her forehead to Lily's for a brief moment. "We'll find a place soon." The sound of a sleek engine hummed behind her, making her pause. Emily turned her head just as a black limousine rolled smoothly to a stop at the curb. The car was glossy, expensive-looking, and completely out of place among the dilapidated buildings and struggling vendors. She stared as the tinted window of the passenger side rolled down. A man sat inside, his face illuminated by the glow of streetlights. He had neatly combed dark hair and sharp, chiseled features, but it was his eyes, blue, icy, and oddly unreadable, that held her gaze. "You look like you could use some help," the man said smoothly, his voice calm, almost too calm. There was a strange undercurrent in his tone, something Emily couldn't quite name, but it sent a chill down her spine. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, instinctively bracing. "Who are you?" she asked, suspicion lacing her words. "Victor Hall," he answered, leaning forward slightly so his face became clearer. There was a faint, polite smile on his lips, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "And I'm offering you and your siblings a hot meal, a safe place to stay. You'll be warm, fed, and looked after." Emily's heart pounded in her chest. Strangers didn't just hand out lifelines for free, not without wanting something in return. Her body tensed, and for a moment, she thought about turning away. She had learned long ago that most people who offered help had hidden motives. "Why?" Emily asked flatly. Her gaze didn't waver, and neither did her grip on the strap of the ragged backpack slung over her shoulder. "Why would you help us?" Victor's smile widened, slow, deliberate. "Let's just say, I've been in your shoes before," he said, voice smooth as silk. "And I know how it feels when no one else will help." Emily's throat tightened. The way he looked at her felt wrong. But Lily whimpered quietly behind her, and Jacob shifted on his feet, shivering in the cold night. Their eyes were hollow, and their thin frames trembled with hunger. She had nothing left to offer them. No more coins, no more promises. Just the same dark alley and the hopelessness that came with it. The man's offer dangled in front of her like bait on a hook, and she hated how desperately she wanted to take it. Her mind screamed at her to walk away, to refuse. But the growl of Jacob's stomach and the pleading look in Lily's eyes silenced those warnings. They needed food tonight. They needed shelter. And she had no better plan. Emily exhaled slowly, the weight of her decision pressing down on her like a heavy chain. "Okay," she whispered, almost to herself. Then louder, "All right, let me get my brother and sister." Victor's expression didn't change, but there was something triumphant in his gaze, a glimmer that Emily caught too late. She turned toward Jacob and Lily, who were still huddled close. "Come on, guys. We're going with him. He's got food and a place for us to sleep." Lily looked up at her sister with wide, questioning eyes. "Are you sure?" Emily forced a smile, one she didn't feel. "Yeah, I'm sure." Jacob hesitated, glancing from Emily to Victor's expensive car. His small hand found Emily's, squeezing tight. "I trust you, Emmy," he whispered. Emily felt her throat tighten again. She swallowed hard and gave Jacob's hand a reassuring squeeze in return. She didn't trust herself, not entirely, but she had to believe that she was making the right choice. She had to. Victor opened the limo door with a flourish, gesturing for them to climb inside. "After you," he said with a smile that looked far too easy. Emily guided Jacob and Lily into the car, sliding in after them. The leather seats were soft, too soft for something that felt so dangerous. The door clicked shut with a quiet finality, and Emily's heart skipped a beat. She glanced back toward the street outside, the street they knew, the street they belonged to. A voice in her head whispered that they shouldn't be leaving, that stepping into this car meant stepping into something far more dangerous than the hunger they had faced before. But it was too late now. They were moving. The limo glided away from the curb, disappearing into the shadows of the city. Emily held her siblings close as they sat in the back seat, her pulse quickening with every turn the car took. She knew she should feel relief. After all, they were finally on their way to a meal, to warmth. But all she could feel was a growing unease that twisted in her stomach. Lily rested her head on Emily's shoulder, her little voice sleepy and soft. "Is this really going to be okay?" Emily pressed a kiss to her sister's hair. "Yeah," she whispered, though the words tasted like lies. "It's going to be okay." Victor's voice drifted from the front seat, calm and measured. "You made the right choice, Emily. You'll see." Emily's jaw clenched as she stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past. Somewhere deep inside, she knew that whatever lay ahead wasn't going to be simple. And she knew that from this point forward, every decision she made would matter more than ever. But for now, all she could do was hold on to Jacob and Lily, and hope she hadn't just made the worst mistake of her life. The limousine glided up a winding driveway, stopping in front of an enormous mansion. Emily stared through the tinted window, her stomach tightening. The house was overwhelming, tall, with grand columns framing the entrance, the kind of place she had only seen in magazines. The siblings exchanged glances, their silence filled with uncertainty. Victor opened the door and gave a small smile, gesturing for them to step out. "Come on, you're home now." Home, the word sounded foreign. Emily felt the weight of it as she climbed out, pulling Jacob and Lily along with her. The entrance doors swung open, and the warm glow of chandeliers illuminated the grand foyer inside. The floors were covered in thick rugs that muffled their footsteps, and every piece of furniture gleamed as though it had never been touched. Crystal chandeliers hung above their heads, casting soft reflections on the polished wood and marble. Large paintings adorned the walls, filled with faces that stared down at them, watching. "This place is huge," Jacob whispered, his eyes wide as he craned his neck to take it all in. "Do people actually live in houses like this?" Lily asked, her tiny voice filled with awe. Victor chuckled as he led them deeper into the house. "I suppose it can be overwhelming at first, but you'll get used to it." Emily didn't respond. She kept her hand tight around Lily's, her instincts humming with unease. The beauty of the place only made her feel more out of place, like a stain on a clean white sheet. Victor stopped near the staircase, motioning toward a young woman in a uniform who was carrying a silver tray. "This is Clara. If you need anything, she'll be happy to help." The woman gave a polite smile, but there was something distant in her expression, as though she was smiling out of habit, not kindness. She placed the tray on a nearby table. "Would you like something to drink?" she asked softly. Jacob nodded eagerly. "Yes, please." Lily glanced nervously at Emily, who gave a subtle nod. "Go ahead," Emily whispered. "It's okay." As Clara handed them small glasses of juice, Victor clapped his hands together. "Make yourselves comfortable. Dinner will be ready soon. I think you'll find it's better than what you're used to." The word stung, even though he said them with a smile. Emily felt the implication linger in the air, that this place, this life, was a world apart from the one they came from. Jacob was too distracted to notice, gulping down his drink. But Emily saw it for what it was, a reminder that they were outsiders here. When they sat down at the dining table, the space felt even larger, the high ceiling echoing the soft clink of silverware. Plates of food were placed in front of them, and the rich, savory smells made Emily's stomach growl involuntarily. She hadn't seen this much food in months. Roasted meats, vegetables dripping with butter, fresh bread still warm from the oven. Jacob's eyes widened as he reached eagerly for the bread, stuffing a piece into his mouth before Emily could stop him. "This is so good," he said through a mouthful. Lily giggled softly, nibbling on a slice of cheese. "Slow down, Jacob," Emily muttered, nudging him. "We don't want to seem rude," Victor interjected, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Let them enjoy it, Emily. They're kids. It's okay to indulge once in a while." Emily didn't relax. Something about Victor's words, about the way he seemed to be constantly watching, made her feel like a bug under glass. She forced herself to take small bites of her food, even though hunger gnawed at her insides. Victor leaned back in his chair, sipping from a glass of wine. His gaze never left Emily. "So, how did you end up on the streets?" he asked, his tone casual but laced with curiosity. Emily froze for a moment, her fork hovering above her plate. "It's not a very interesting story," she muttered, lowering her eyes. Victor smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile that made Emily feel as though he could see straight through her. "I disagree," he said. "Everyone has an interesting story, and I like hearing the best ones." Emily forced herself to meet his gaze, her jaw tight. "There's not much to tell. Our parents—" She hesitated, then shook her head. "They're gone. That's all." Victor's smile deepened. "I'm sorry to hear that, but you must have been through quite a lot to survive on your own. It takes a certain kind of strength." Emily didn't respond. She could feel the weight of his words, like he was trying to peel away the layers she had carefully built to protect herself. She glanced at Jacob and Lily, who were happily focused on their food, oblivious to the tension thickening between her and Victor. Victor's gaze lingered on her a moment longer before he leaned back, swirling the wine in his glass thoughtfully. "You'll be safe here," he said, almost too softly. "No more struggling. No more hunger. You'll have everything you need." Emily nodded stiffly, though the knot in her stomach refused to loosen. After dinner, Clara escorted them to their room, a lavish guest suite with plush bedding, heavy curtains, and a soft carpet beneath their feet. It was more luxurious than anything Emily had ever dreamed of. Lily squealed in delight as she jumped onto the bed, her small frame sinking into the thick blankets. "Emmy, look, it's like a princess bed," she exclaimed, kicking her legs happily. Jacob was already exploring the room, opening drawers and peeking into the bathroom, where marble countertops and gold-trimmed mirrors gleamed. "This place is awesome," he said, running back into the room. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, watching her siblings with a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was good to see them happy, really happy, for the first time in a long time. But something gnawed at the back of her mind. Lily crawled over and snuggled into her side. "Do you think we can stay here forever, Emmy?" Emily kissed the top of her sister's head. "We'll see," she whispered, stroking Lily's hair gently. Jacob flopped down beside them, sighing contentedly. "I hope we do. This place is way better than, out there." Emily didn't argue, but deep inside, she knew nothing came for free. Later that night, when the lights were off and Jacob and Lily were fast asleep, Emily lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, her mind spinning. Every creak of the house made her flinch. Every shadow that shifted beneath the door made her heart race. Victor's voice echoed in her thoughts. "Asterisk, you'll have everything you need. No more struggling, asterisk." It sounded too good to be true, and Emily knew from bitter experience that things that seemed too good usually were. She slipped out of bed as quietly as she could, padding across the room to check the door. It wasn't locked, but it might as well have been. Victor's presence hung over the house like a silent warning. "You belong to me now." Emily sat back down, hugging her knees to her chest. She glanced at Jacob and Lily, curled up together under the thick blankets, and felt the familiar ache of responsibility settle deep in her bones. She had promised to protect them, and she would. But as she stared out into the darkness, the gnawing unease inside her grew stronger. Something was wrong. She could feel it, and she knew without a doubt that they hadn't escaped danger. They had just stepped into a different kind. At first, the mansion felt like a dream come true. There were more toys than Jacob had ever imagined, trucks, action figures, and board games that took up entire shelves. Lily had new dresses with colorful ribbons, each one softer and prettier than anything she'd ever owned. And for Emily, there were books, shelves full of them, with stories that offered her brief escapes from reality. Most of all, they had beds, real beds with soft mattresses and warm blankets. It was a luxury they hadn't known in a long time. For the first few days, they allowed themselves to sink into the comfort, like survivors clinging to a piece of driftwood after being lost at sea. Jacob spent hours playing, laughing freely in a way Emily hadn't heard in months. Lily twirled in front of mirrors, admiring herself in her new clothes. Even Emily, despite her lingering doubts, enjoyed moments of quiet peace, her nose buried in novels that transported her far from the life they'd left behind. But the dream began to fray at the edges sooner than she expected. One morning, as the siblings sat around the breakfast table, Victor's tone shifted. "I need you to understand something," he said, his voice calm but edged with firmness. "You can't leave the property without my permission. It's for your safety." Emily looked up from her plate. "Our safety?" Victor gave her a slow nod, his eyes unblinking. "Yes, there are dangerous people out there. People who would take advantage of children like you. Emily bit her lip, not fully convinced. We were doing fine before. She began, but Victor cut her off with a knowing smile. Fine? Emily, starving on the streets isn't fine. I'm offering you something better. Don't throw it away by being careless. She wanted to argue, but Lily's bright-eyed smile across the table made her swallow the words. Lily was happy, Jacob too. That was all that mattered. At least, that's what she tried to tell herself. The questions started soon after. Victor would sit with them at lunch or dinner, casually steering the conversation toward their past. Where were your parents when you ended up on the streets? Victor asked one afternoon, his tone smooth, as if the question were no more significant than asking what they'd eaten for breakfast. Emily glanced at her siblings, then gave her usual answer. They're gone. Victor didn't seem satisfied. He leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on the table. Gone where? Did they abandon you? Or were they taken from you? Jacob's fork clattered to his plate, and Lily looked down, her little hand suddenly very interested in her napkin. Emily clenched her jaw. It doesn't matter, she said curtly. Victor tilted his head, studying her the way a cat watches a bird. It matters to me, he said softly. If I'm going to help you, I need to understand. Emily forced a tight smile. We don't have any family. If that's what you're asking, Victor nodded slowly. But the way his eyes lingered on her made it clear that he wasn't done digging. Later that night, after the siblings were tucked into bed, Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her mind swirled with questions. Why was Victor so interested in their past? What did it matter where their parents had gone or whether they had family? It wasn't like they'd ever see any of them again. Lily stirred beside her, curling closer into Emily's side. Do you think Victor really wants to help us? She whispered sleepily. Emily brushed her fingers through Lily's hair, her heart heavy. I don't know, she admitted softly. Jacob, lying on the other side, shifted to face them. Maybe he just likes us, he offered. He's nice. Mostly. Emily frowned. Maybe, she muttered. Or maybe not. Jacob didn't respond. He was already drifting off, lulled to sleep by the comfort of the big bed and the warmth of the blankets. But Emily couldn't sleep. Something gnawed at the edges of her mind, a sense that all of this, asterisk the food, the clothes, the kindness, asterisk, was part of something bigger, something dangerous. A week later, Victor left the mansion for the afternoon. I'll be back by evening, he told them as Clara, the housekeeper, hovered nearby. Behave while I'm gone. The moment he was out the door, Emily's pulse quickened. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for, but she knew there was something Victor was hiding. Stay with Lily, Emily told Jacob, her voice low. I'll be back soon. Jacob gave her a puzzled look. Where are you going? Just checking something, Emily muttered, brushing him off. She moved quickly through the mansion, her footsteps silent on the thick carpets. Every closed door she passed made her stomach twist tighter. Asterisk what's behind them? What don't they want us to see? Asterisk. Eventually, she found herself in front of a door at the far end of the hallway. It was different from the others, plain and unadorned but locked. Something told her this was it. Whatever answers she was looking for were on the other side. Emily glanced over her shoulder, her heart hammering. The hall was empty. She pulled a hairpin from her pocket and knelt by the lock, her hands trembling. She'd done this before, out of necessity, when they were desperate on the streets. But this felt different. This feels dangerous. The lock clicked open with a soft snick, and Emily pushed the door inward, holding her breath. The room inside was dimly lit, the walls lined with filing cabinets and shelves stacked with thick folders. A desk sat in the center, and on it lay a neat pile of papers. Emily's heart sank as she stepped inside, the air thick with unease. She approached the desk slowly, her fingers trembling as she flipped through the topmost folder. What she saw made her blood run cold. It was a list, names, addresses, dates. And there, among the names, were hers, Jacob's, and Lily's. Beside their names was a note, asterisk acquired, awaiting transport, asterisk. Emily's stomach turned. She flipped further into the folder and found photographs. Images of children, some smiling, others looking lost and scared. And beneath them were newspaper clippings, headlines about missing children, human trafficking busts, and organized criminal networks. Her hands shook as she realized the truth. Victor hadn't saved them. He'd captured them. They weren't guests in his mansion. They were inventory. Emily shoved the papers back into the folder, her breath coming fast and shallow. She had to get out. She had to get Jacob and Lily and run. Asterisk now star. As she turned to leave, her foot caught on the edge of the desk, and the sharp sound of a metal drawer sliding open echoed through the room. She froze, her heart slamming in her chest. From inside the drawer, something glimmered, a small phone. Victor's. She hesitated for only a second before snatching it up and shoving it into her pocket. Emily slipped out of the room, closing the door behind her as quietly as she could. Her hands were still shaking, her heart racing. But there was no time for fear. She had everything she needed, the truth. And now, all that mattered was getting her siblings out before it was too late. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, her heart thundering in her chest. She clutched Victor's phone tightly, feeling its weight in her hand as if it were a lifeline. She had read enough in that lock room to understand the truth. Asterisk, they weren't safe here. Not even close, asterisk, if they stayed. They would disappear just like the other children in those files. There was no more time to second guess. They had to run. Tonight. She glanced at her siblings, their peaceful faces illuminated by the dim light filtering through the curtains. Lily's hand rested on Jacob's chest, rising and falling with each breath. Emily's throat tightened with guilt. She had brought them here. She had trusted Victor, even if only out of desperation. Asterisk, I won't let him take them. Not now. Not ever, asterisk. She shook Jacob gently. Jacob, wake up, she whispered, her voice urgent but soft. He stirred, blinking sleep from his eyes. Emmy? Jacob mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. What's going on? Emily leaned closer, brushing his hair back. We're leaving. Now. Get up, okay? Jacob sat up slowly, confusion etched on his face. Why? What's wrong? I'll explain later. Just trust me, Emily whispered, glancing over at Lily, who was still curled up in the blankets. Wake her up, but quietly. Jacob nodded, his sleepiness melting away as he sensed the seriousness in her tone. He gently shook Lily awake. Lily, wake up. We gotta go. Lily blinked up at him, rubbing her eyes. Why? Where are we going? Emily crouched next to them, her voice low but steady. We're going somewhere safe, but we have to be really quiet, okay? Lily nodded, her trust in Emily unwavering. She reached for her sister's hand without another word. Emily grabbed the small backpack they had brought with them, their only possessions from their life on the streets, and slung it over her shoulder. Come on, stay close to me. They crept down the hallway, Emily leading the way. Every step felt like a lifetime. The mansion, so grand and beautiful by day, now felt like a labyrinth of shadows, each corner a potential hiding place for danger. The silence was heavy, broken only by the soft shuffling of their feet on the carpet. When they reached the staircase, Emily paused, listening intently. Nothing, she exhaled silently and motioned for Jacob and Lily to follow her down. The grand front door was just ahead, the glossy wood glinting faintly in the dim light. Freedom was only a few steps away. Emily's heart pounded as she gripped the handle, turning it slowly to avoid making a sound. The lock clicked quietly, and she pushed the door open just enough to feel the cool air on her skin. Relief washed over her. Asterisk, they were going to make it asterisk. Then a voice sliced through the silence. "And where do you think you're going?" Emily froze, her hand still on the door. She turned slowly, her stomach dropping as she saw Victor standing at the top of the staircase, his hands casually in his pockets, a dangerous smile playing on his lips. Jacob gasped, clinging to Emily's side. Lily hid behind her sister, her small fingers gripping Emily's shirt tightly. Victor descended the stairs slowly, each step deliberate, like a predator closing in on its prey. "You didn't really think you could just walk out, did you?" Emily straightened her spine, forcing herself to meet his gaze even as her heart pounded painfully in her chest. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded, her voice sharp despite the fear trembling underneath. Victor's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Because I can." His words were as cold as ice. "And because kids like you, no family, no one looking for you, you're perfect. You disappear, and no one even notices." Jacob tightened his grip on Emily's hand. "Please," he whispered, his voice small and frightened. "Just let us go." Victor's expression didn't change. He took another step forward, his eyes never leaving Emily's. "It's too late for that, Jacob." Emily clenched her jaw, pulling her brother closer. "We'll scream," she threatened. "The neighbors will hear us." Victor chuckled, shaking his head. "There are no neighbors. Not close enough. Anyway, no one will hear you. No one will help you." Emily's mind raced. Think. She had to buy them time. Her eyes flicked toward the door, calculating the distance. If she could get Jacob and Lily through it, if they could just run, maybe they had a chance. Victor tilted his head, watching her closely. "You're thinking of running, aren't you?" he said, almost amused. "I admire that. You're a fighter, but it won't help." Emily gritted her teeth, forcing her voice to remain steady. "You can't keep us here forever." Victor's smile sharpened. "I only need to keep you here long enough. Long enough for arrangements to be made." Lily whimpered, her grip on Emily tightening. Emily's heart ached, but she didn't let her fear show. She had to be strong for them. Victor took another step toward them. "Now, why don't you be smart and go back upstairs? Make it easy on yourselves." Emily's fingers itched to grab the doorknob again, to fling the door open and run. But she knew they wouldn't make it. Not if they ran now. She had to wait for the right moment. Just a few more seconds. Jacob's hand slipped into hers, squeezing tight. His wide eyes met hers, full of fear but also trust. He was waiting for her signal. So was Lily. Emily took a slow breath, her mind snapping into focus. This was it, their only chance. Without a word, she yanked the door open and shoved Jacob and Lily through it. "Run!" She screamed. Victor's expression twisted into rage. "Get back here," he roared, lunging down the stairs. Emily didn't look back. She bolted through the door, her heart hammering as she grabbed her siblings and pulled them toward the driveway. They sprinted across the dark expanse, feet slapping against the pavement, breath coming in frantic bursts. Emily could hear Victor's footsteps pounding behind them. Too close. Asterisk too close star. Go, go, she urged, shoving Jacob and Lily ahead of her. Don't stop. The gates loomed in the distance, locked shut. Panic surged through Emily, but she didn't let it slow her down. Asterisk, there has to be a way out. There has to be, asterisk. Victor's voice echoed behind them, filled with fury. You're not getting away. Emily spotted a small gap at the edge of the fence, a section where the metal bars didn't quite meet the ground. It was narrow, but maybe, just maybe, they could squeeze through. Jacob, Lily, there, she shouted, pointing toward the gap. Crawl through. Jacob dove to the ground first, wriggling through the narrow space. Lily followed, her tiny frame slipping through with ease. Emily dropped to her knees, her heart racing as she shoved the backpack through the gap. She twisted her body, trying to squeeze through after them, but just as she was halfway out, a hand clamped down on her ankle. No! Emily kicked wildly, her foot connecting with something solid. Victor cursed loudly, his grip loosening for just a second. Asterisk, just enough, asterisk. Emily yanked her leg free and scrambled through the gap, gasping as she tumbled to the other side. She grabbed Jacob and Lily, pulling them close. They were free, for now, but Emily knew this wasn't over. Victor wasn't the kind of man to let them go easily, and as they disappeared into the night, she could still hear his voice echoing in her mind. Asterisk, you won't get far. Asterisk. Emily's breath was ragged as she clung to Jacob and Lily, pressing them close against the cold metal fence outside Victor's mansion. Her heart raced in her chest, drowning out the world around her. They had escaped, but only barely. Victor's voice still echoed in her mind. You won't get far. They crouched low in the darkness, waiting, listening. Every sound, every crack of a branch or gust of footsteps made Emily flinch. She tightened her grip on her siblings, desperate to keep them quiet. They couldn't be caught. Not now. Not when they were so close to freedom. Jacob trembled beside her, trying his best to be brave. What do we do now, Emmy? He whispered, his breath warm against her ear. Emily swallowed hard, wiping sweat from her brow. Think, Emily, think the phone. Victor's phone was still in her pocket. The last thing she had done before their escape was dial the emergency number, praying someone would hear them. Help's coming, Emily whispered, trying to sound more certain than she felt. Just stay with me. We're almost there. Lily clung tighter to her, burying her face in Emily's side. I'm scared, she whimpered, her small voice breaking. I know, baby, Emily murmured, stroking her hair. I'm scared too, but we'll be okay. I promise. She glanced back toward the mansion, fear clawing at her insides. Please hurry. Inside the mansion, Victor paced the grand entryway like a predator cornered in his own den. His jaw was tight, and his eyes burned with rage. He had underestimated Emily, and it infuriated him. No one had ever slipped through his fingers like this. He stormed toward the front door, his mind racing. Asterisk, they can't have gotten far. I'll find them, and when I do, asterisk. His hand reached for the doorknob, just as a loud thud of something heavy struck the door from the outside. Before Victor could react, the door burst open with a deafening crash. Wooden splinters flew through the air as armed officers swarmed the room, their boots pounding against the marble floors. Police! Nobody move! A voice bellowed. Victor stumbled back, fury twisting his features. His gaze darted toward the staircase, an escape route that was already out of reach. Detective Michael Reynolds stepped into the foyer, his badge gleaming under the light. He moved with purpose, gun drawn, eyes sharp as a blade. "Victor Hall!" Reynolds's voice cut through the chaos like a warning shot. "You're under arrest for kidnapping and human trafficking. Hands where I can see them." Victor's lip curled. "This is a mistake," he hissed, slowly raising his hands. But the hatred in his eyes betrayed him. Michael didn't flinch. "The only mistake was thinking you'd get away with it." Two officers moved in, forcing Victor to the ground as he snarled and thrashed. They yanked his arms behind him, snapping handcuffs around his wrists. Victor twisted his head to glare at Michael. "You think this is over?" His voice was a low, venomous hiss. "This isn't over." Michael knelt beside him, his expression calm but unwavering. "It's over for you." He gave a slight nod to the officers. "Get him out of here." As the officers dragged Victor toward the door, he locked eyes with Emily, who had just been ushered inside by another officer. His cold, furious gaze burned into hers, a silent promise of revenge. Emily stared back, her hands still gripping Jacob and Lily's shoulders protectively. Fear churned inside her, but she refused to let it show. He won't hurt us again. He can't, Victor's lips twisted into a bitter sneer. "You'll pay for this," he whispered, just loud enough for her to hear. Emily didn't blink. "You already lost," she whispered back. Victor's eyes darkened with fury, but before he could say another word, the officers dragged him out the door and into the waiting patrol cars. As the front doors slammed shut behind them, the chaos began to settle. The officers swept through the house, clearing every room to ensure no one else was lurking inside. Meanwhile, Michael Reynolds turned toward Emily, his stern expression softening just slightly. "Are you three okay?" he asked, lowering his voice. Emily nodded, though her legs felt shaky beneath her. I think so." She glanced down at Jacob and Lily, who clung to her sides, their wide eyes filled with both fear and relief. "We're okay." Michael gave a small, reassuring nod. "You're safe now." Emily hesitated, her mind still spinning with everything that had happened. "How did you know?" she asked quietly. "How did you find us?" Michael's lips curved into a faint smile. "You used his phone to call 911, he explained. "You were smart, Emily. Brave." Emily's heart pounded, a strange mix of relief and disbelief washing over her. She had been terrified that no one would hear her call, that no one would come in time. But Michael had. Lily tugged at Emily's sleeve, her voice small. "Is the bad man gone?" Michael crouched down, so he was at eye level with Lily. "He's gone," he said gently. "He can't hurt you anymore." Lily blinked, her lips trembling. Then, without warning, she threw her arms around Michael's neck, clinging to him with all the strength her little body could muster. Michael seemed momentarily surprised, but then he wrapped his arms around her in return, holding her as if she were his own. "It's okay, kid," he murmured. "You're going to be okay." Jacob shifted nervously beside Emily, his fingers still tangled in her shirt. "What's going to happen to us now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily didn't have an answer. The weight of that question hung heavy between them. Michael straightened, releasing Lily gently and giving Jacob a reassuring look. "Don't worry," he said. "We'll figure it out. You're not alone anymore." Emily bit her lip, fighting the tears that threatened to spill. After everything they had been through, the idea of not being alone, of finally being safe, felt almost too good to believe. As the officers finished securing the scene, Michael turned back to Emily. "There's someone I'd like you to meet," he said gently. "She's waiting at the station. She's going to help you." Emily frowned, her guard rising instinctively. "Who?" Michael's smile was kind but knowing. Someone who understands what you've been through. Someone who can give you a home. Emily glanced at her siblings, the question lingering in her mind. Asterisk, can we trust this? Can we trust anyone ever again? Asterisk, but for now, all she could do was take a breath and try. Okay, she whispered, her voice shaky but determined. We'll come with you. Michael nodded, a spark of approval in his eyes. Good choice, Emily. With that, he led them out of the mansion, the weight of their ordeal finally lifting as the cool night air greeted them. The police station felt like a blur, bright lights, the hum of conversations, and endless questions from officers trying to piece together what had happened. Emily clung to her siblings throughout the night, answering the detectives' questions as best as she could while exhaustion gnawed at her bones. Jacob sat silently beside her, gripping her hand like it was the only thing anchoring him to the world. And Lily slept fitfully in her lap, murmuring in her dreams. Hours passed in a haze. Emily kept glancing at the door, half expecting Victor to walk through it with that cold, menacing smile on his face. It wasn't until Detective Reynolds returned with a calm, reassuring expression that Emily let out the breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. We've found someone for you, Reynolds said gently, kneeling beside the siblings. Emily stiffened. Someone? Reynolds offered a small, kind smile. Her name is Margaret Bennett. She runs a private program for kids who've been through hard times. He paused, as if carefully choosing his next words. She's good people. She's going to help you. Jacob glanced at Emily, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. We have to leave, he whispered. Emily tightened her grip on his hand. We'll stay together, no matter what, she promised. Then, with her heart in her throat, she nodded to Reynolds. Okay, we'll go with her. Margaret Bennett was waiting for them in a quiet room at the station, a calm presence amidst the chaos. She stood as they entered, her posture graceful and composed, but her eyes were warm and kind. She was in her mid-50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a neat bun and soft wrinkles etched around her eyes, a face that had known hardship but hadn't been hardened by it. You must be Emily, Margaret said softly, her gaze resting on the eldest sibling before shifting to Jacob and Lily. And these must be Jacob and Lily. Jacob shrank slightly behind Emily, but Lily gave Margaret a timid wave. Margaret knelt down to their level, her smile gentle and patient. I know you're all scared, and you've been through more than any child should ever have to, but I want you to know you're safe now. You'll never have to worry about going hungry or sleeping in strange places again. Emily's heart squeezed painfully. It sounded too good to be true, just like Victor's promises had. But there was something different about Margaret, something that felt real. Why are you helping us? Emily asked, her voice laced with quiet suspicion. Margaret met her gaze steadily. Because I've been where you are. A long time ago, I needed someone to help me too. And someone did. She smiled, a little sadly. Now it's my turn to do the same. Emily studied her for a long moment, searching for any trace of deceit. But all she saw was honesty. Jacob tugged at Emily's sleeve. Can we go now? He whispered, exhaustion heavy in his voice. Emily nodded slowly. Okay, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Okay. Margaret rose gracefully to her feet. Let's get you home. The apartment Margaret brought them to wasn't big or fancy, but it felt different. The walls were painted warm, soft colors, and the furniture, though simple, looked comfortable and inviting. For the first time in a long time, Emily didn't feel like they were intruders. This place was meant for them. This is your new home, Margaret said as they stepped inside. It's not much, but it's yours. and you'll have everything you need." Jacob's eyes lit up as he explored the small living room, running his hands over the sofa cushions. "We get to stay here?" he asked, a hint of wonder in his voice. Margaret smiled warmly. "Yes, sweetheart, as long as you want." Lily's eyes sparkled as she peeked into the bedroom, where two neatly made beds waited. "We don't have to share a bed?" she asked, her voice full of disbelief. Margaret laughed softly. "No, sweet girl. You each get your own space." Emily stood silently by the door, her hands gripping the straps of her old backpack. The others were already beginning to relax, but she couldn't. Not yet. She kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for someone to yank it all away. Margaret seemed to sense her hesitation. She placed a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. "It's okay, Emily," she said quietly. "You don't have to trust me right away. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. I just want them to be okay," she whispered, glancing at her siblings. Margaret gave her shoulder a soft squeeze. "They will be. So will you." In the days that followed, something remarkable began to happen. They started to heal. Slowly, piece by piece, the weight that had pressed down on them for so long began to lift. Jacob discovered a box of art supplies Margaret had left for him: sketch pads, colored pencils, and paints. He spent hours drawing, filling page after page with vivid images of things he could only dream of before: forests, oceans, and fantastical creatures. His drawings became a kind of therapy, a way for him to express the things he couldn't put into words. One afternoon, Emily found him sitting at the kitchen table, lost in his art. He looked up and grinned. "Look, Emmy, I made a dragon." She smiled, the sight of his joy warming something deep inside her. "That's amazing, Jake." Lily, meanwhile, blossomed at school. For the first time, she had a backpack full of books, notebooks, and pencils. She loved learning, especially reading stories about far-off places and adventures. Every day, she came home with something new to share: a new word, a story, or a piece of art she had made in class. Miss Carter said, "I was the best reader in the class today," Lily announced proudly one evening, holding up a gold star sticker. Emily ruffled her sister's hair, her heart swelling with pride. "That's because you're amazing," she said, planting a kiss on Lily's forehead. And then there was Emily. For the first time in what felt like forever, she had a space of her own, quiet, safe, and private. Margaret gave her a journal, and Emily found herself drawn to it, writing down her thoughts, her fears, and everything they had endured. At first, the words came slowly, hesitant and jagged. But the more she wrote, the more the dam inside her began to break. She filled the pages with everything she had kept bottled up: memories, nightmares, and moments of hope. The act of writing became her lifeline, a way to make sense of the chaos and reclaim control over her story. One evening, as the siblings curled up on the couch, Margaret visited with a tray of warm cookies and sat beside them. "How are you settling in?" Margaret asked gently, looking at each of them. Jacob grinned through a mouthful of cookie. "This place is awesome." Lily nodded eagerly. "We love it here." Margaret turned to Emily, her expression soft. "And you, Emily, how are you doing?" Emily hesitated, glancing down at the journal in her lap. I think I'm getting better," she admitted quietly. Margaret smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "Good. You deserve to feel safe, and you deserve to be happy." Emily blinked back the sudden sting of tears. For the first time in a long time, she believed those words. Maybe, just maybe, they really were safe now. As the weeks passed, The siblings grew stronger, their bond unbreakable. They were no longer just survivors. They were beginning to live again. And though the scars of their past would never fully fade, they had something they hadn't dared to hope for before, a future. But even as Emily began to embrace this new life, she knew there was still one thing she had to face. One thing she couldn't leave buried in the past. One day, a letter arrived. It was from Victor, sent from prison. Emily stared at the envelope, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew what it was, a request for forgiveness. And as she sat at the kitchen table, the unopened letter resting before her, she realized she had a choice to make. It was an ordinary morning when Margaret knocked softly on Emily's bedroom door, holding a plain white envelope in her hand. "This came for you, Emily," Margaret said quietly, her expression measured, as though she knew the weight of what she was handing over. Emily's heart skipped. "For me?" she asked, confused. Margaret nodded. "It's from Victor." The name hit her like a punch to the stomach. For a moment, Emily felt paralyzed. All the air seemed to drain from the room as memories surged. The mansion, his smile that never reached his eyes, his voice dripping with quiet menace. She stared at the envelope, her hands frozen at her sides. Jacob and Lily's laughter drifted from the living room, a distant reminder of the life they were finally starting to rebuild. But in this moment, the walls seemed to close in around Emily. Margaret sat down beside her on the bed, setting the envelope on her lap. "You don't have to read it," she said gently. "It's your choice." Emily's hands trembled as she picked up the letter. "I need to know what he said," she whispered, though her voice wavered with uncertainty. She opened the envelope with unsteady fingers and pulled out the folded sheet of paper. Victor's handwriting was messy, scrawled as if written in haste. Her breath hitched as she began to read. "Asterisk Emily, I made mistakes. I know that nothing I say can erase the things I've done or the pain I've caused you. But I want you to know I'm sorry. Asterisk." Emily's hands tightened around the paper as she forced herself to keep reading. Asterisk, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I wouldn't forgive me either, but I needed to say it anyway. I hope, somehow, you'll find peace. I hope you'll move on and live a life without fear. One better than the one I tried to trap you in." Asterisk, her heart pounded painfully in her chest, and for a moment, the words blurred together. Sorry. What did sorry even mean from someone like Victor? Was it genuine or just another manipulation? Her mind filled with images she wished she could erase. Victor blocking their escape, the coldness in his voice when he told them they were perfect for disappearing, the promises of safety that had all been lies. Her fists curled tightly around the paper. How dare he? Margaret stayed silent as Emily sat on the bed, clutching the letter. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. Why now? Emily muttered bitterly. Why write this now? Margaret didn't offer an answer. She knew this was Emily's storm to weather, and she wouldn't interfere unless asked. Emily stared at the letter, anger and confusion swirling inside her. A part of her wanted to rip it to shreds, to erase every word he had written and throw the pieces in the trash where they belonged. But another part, a quieter part, felt something else. She wasn't sure what it was. Not forgiveness, not yet. But not the pure hatred she'd expected, either. Margaret placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You don't have to decide anything today, she said softly. There's no right or wrong answer. Emily's voice cracked. I don't know if I can forgive him, Margaret. I don't know if I want to. Margaret gave her shoulder a light squeeze. And that's okay. Forgiveness isn't something you do for him. It's something you do for yourself if you want to. If you're ready. Emily sat with that for a long time, her mind replaying everything Victor had done. She thought about the fear, the betrayal, the helplessness. But she also thought about something else, about the life she had now. Jacob's drawings, Lily's smile, the laughter they shared at the dinner table. They were free. Victor had taken so much from her, from all of them. But she was starting to realize something important. He didn't own her anger either. She spent the next few hours at the kitchen table, staring at the letter. Jacob and Lily occasionally peeked in, but Margaret kept them occupied, knowing Emily needed time. Emily thought about what Victor's letter really meant. Was he genuinely sorry? Did he truly regret what he had done? Or was this just another trick to ease his own guilt? In the end, she realized it didn't matter. She wasn't responsible for his guilt or for his redemption. The only thing that mattered was what she chose to do next. Emily grabbed her journal and opened to a blank page. The pen hovered over the paper for a moment, and then she began to write. Not to Victor, but to herself. I don't forgive him yet, she wrote slowly, the words coming out raw but honest. Asterisk, and maybe I never will. But I won't let him live inside my head anymore. I won't let him keep me angry. He doesn't deserve that power. Asterisk. She paused, then added one more line. Asterisk, I'm choosing to move forward, not for him, but for me. Asterisk. When she finished, she closed the journal with a sense of finality. The weight in her chest didn't disappear completely, but it shifted, lighter now, as if she had taken the first step toward releasing it. Later that night, Margaret found Emily sitting on the porch, the letter resting on her lap. The cool night air brushed softly against their skin, but the tension between them was quiet, not heavy. Margaret sat beside her, without saying a word, waiting. I'm not going to let him control me anymore, Emily said finally, her voice soft but steady. Margaret smiled, her eyes warm with quiet approval. That's a powerful choice, Emily. Emily exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of that truth settle into her bones. I don't know if I can forgive him, she admitted, but I think I can let it go. Margaret nodded. That's enough. Emily looked out into the night, her heart calmer than it had been in a long time. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. Victor would no longer define her. She would decide what her life looked like from here on out. After a long moment of quiet, Emily stood, folding Victor's letter carefully. She didn't rip it up or throw it away. She placed it back inside the envelope and tucked it into her journal, as if saying, this is part of my story, but it doesn't own me. Come inside when you're ready, Margaret said softly as she rose to her feet, giving Emily's shoulder one last reassuring squeeze. Emily nodded, her heart lighter. I will. And as Margaret disappeared into the house, Emily stood alone under the night sky, breathing in the freedom of the life she had fought so hard to reclaim. Tomorrow was waiting. Years had passed, but the echoes of the past still lived within Emily, not as wounds, but as scars, reminders of everything she had overcome. Today, she stood at the edge of a brightly lit stage, waiting to step into a moment she had never thought possible. She adjusted the microphone pinned to her dress, taking one last steadying breath. The crowd beyond the curtain buzzed with quiet chatter, the sound of clinking glasses and rustling programs filling the air. Emily glanced down at her notes, but she knew she wouldn't need them. She had lived every word of the story. Margaret appeared beside her, her warm smile as reassuring as ever. You've got this, Emily, she whispered. You've had it all along. Emily gave a small nod, nerves swirling in her chest. But beneath the anxiety, There was also a quiet, unshakable resolve. When the announcer called her name, the crowd erupted into applause, and Emily stepped forward, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. She stood at the center of the stage, the lights blinding for a moment, but she straightened her shoulders and held her head high. Confidence wrapped around her like armor, not to protect herself from the world, but to remind herself that she belonged here. She had earned this. The applause quieted as she approached the microphone, and the audience leaned in, waiting for her to speak. "My story isn't an easy one," Emily began, her voice steady and clear. "There were moments I thought I wouldn't survive. Times I believed I was broken beyond repair." She let the silence settle for a beat, meeting the eyes of the people in the room. "But I stand here today because of the choices I made, not just to survive, but to become more than what happened to me." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Emily took another breath, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and gratitude. "The truth is," she continued, "we don't always get to choose what happens to us, but we do get to choose what we become because of it." Her gaze shifted to the front row, where Margaret sat beside Detective Michael Reynolds, both of them beaming with quiet pride. Margaret gave her a small, encouraging nod. "And I chose not to let anger or fear define me," Emily said. "I chose hope. I chose forgiveness. Not just for others, but for myself." When she finished her speech, the room erupted into applause once more, louder and warmer this time. Emily stepped back from the microphone, her heart pounding in her chest. Not with fear, but with something she hadn't known she would feel here: peace. As the audience rose to their feet in applause, two small figures broke away from the crowd. Jacob and Lily sprinted toward the stage, their faces lit up with pride and joy. "Emmy!" Lily cried, her voice thick with emotion as she threw herself into her sister's arms. Jacob was right behind her, wrapping his arms tightly around both of them. "You did it!" he exclaimed, his voice muffled against Emily's shoulder. Emily squeezed them close, burying her face in their hair for a moment. Tears stung her eyes, but they were tears of joy. "We did it," she whispered, holding them as tightly as she could. "We made it. Together." Lily looked up, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I'm so proud of you, Emmy," she said, her voice soft but full of love. Jacob grinned, wiping his nose with his sleeve. "Yeah, you're like a superhero." Emily laughed through her tears, brushing a hand through his messy hair. "I had the best sidekicks," she said, kissing the tops of their heads. As they stood there, tangled in each other's arms, Emily felt the weight of everything they had gone through lift from her shoulders. It would never be erased, what they had suffered, what they had lost, but it no longer defined them. In a cold, dimly lit prison cell, Victor Hall sat alone on a steel bunk, the small television in the corner casting a faint blue glow across his face. The screen showed Emily standing at the podium, the sound of her voice carrying softly through the speakers. Victor watched in silence, his expression hard to read. His once pristine suit had been replaced with the dull gray uniform of an inmate. The same man who had once controlled everything now sat powerless, his hands resting on his knees, the weight of his actions hanging over him like a shadow. As Emily's speech drew to a close, she smiled at her siblings, her future, and spoke the final words that echoed through the small television speakers. "It's not the things we go through that define us. It's the choices we make when everything seems lost. I chose to move forward, and that's what makes me free." Victor's gaze remained locked on the screen, his cold blue eyes reflecting the image of the young woman he had tried to destroy. The woman who had escaped him, not just physically but emotionally. The woman who had built a life far beyond the one he had tried to trap her in. For a long moment, Victor sat perfectly still, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists. And then, something strange happened, something even he didn't fully understand. A single tear slipped down his cheek, trailing slowly along the hard lines of his face. He didn't wipe it away. Back at the event, Emily stood in the embrace of the people who mattered most: Jacob, Lily, Margaret, and Detective Reynolds. As she looked out at the sea of faces, she felt something she had never imagined she would: peace. The world had tried to break her, but it hadn't won. She had chosen to survive, to fight, and to forgive, not for anyone else's sake, but for her own. And in doing so, she had discovered a truth more powerful than any fear or pain. Even in the darkest moments, there is always light. And that light isn't given, it's made. It's a choice, day after day. Emily looked down at her siblings, at the people who had become her family, and knew they would keep walking forward together, no matter what came next, because their story wasn't just one of survival. It was a story of hope, a story of choosing to live. If you've made it this far, then subscribe to the channel and leave a comment.